Did you know the most famous thing everyone says about Chicago is factually wrong? The Windy City nickname has nothing to do with wind. Chicago's average wind speed of 10.3 miles per hour does not even place it in America's top 10 windiest cities. Boston is windier. Amarillo is windier. The name was a political insult, coined by rival journalists as early as 1876 and weaponized against Chicago politicians they called full of hot air, or that a single 6-month event in Chicago gave the modern world the Ferris wheel, the zipper, Cracker Jack, juicy fruit gum, and the automatic dishwasher, all at once. Or that the deadliest single-building fire in American history, 602 people dead, 212 of them children, in under 15 minutes, happened inside a Chicago theater that city inspectors had just certified as absolutely fireproof. The building had been open for exactly 5 weeks, and not one person was ever convicted of a single death. Chicago does not sit at the center of America. It sits at the center of everything America has chosen to forget. The engineering that made every modern city possible. The labor movement that gave you the weekend. The migration that gave you rock and roll. The disasters that killed thousands while the people responsible kept their pensions. Most people drive through Chicago thinking they understand it. What they are actually standing on is one of the most engineered, most politically explosive, most culturally generative, and most death-defying cities in the history of the Western world. Nobody stops long enough to see it. So we are counting down 35 facts about Chicago that will completely change how you see the city of big shoulders. Stick around to the end, because what we saved for last is documented, devastating, and has never been made right. Coming in at number 35, the nickname was a lie. According to etymologist Barry Poppick, whose research is corroborated by Britannica, the phrase first appeared in the Cincinnati Enquirer on May 9, 1876, not as a weather observation, but as a political insult aimed at Chicago's politicians and their habit of overpromising. By the 1890s, New York journalists were deploying it specifically to mock Chicago's campaign to win the 1893 World's Fair bid. Chicago's actual average wind speed is 10.3 miles per hour. Amarillo, Texas, averages 13.6. The wind belongs to Amarillo. The skyline, the skyscraper, and house music belong to Chicago. At number 34, the city that lifted itself. Between 1858 and the early 1870s, engineers under civil engineer Ellis S. Chesbrough physically raised the entire downtown core of Chicago between 4 and 14 feet, using jack screws, while people continued to work and shop inside the buildings without interruption. The most extraordinary single operation took 5 days. 600 men operating 6,000 jack screws raised a full city block of Lake Street, multiple 5-story masonry buildings totaling 35,000 tons, by 4 feet and 8 inches, with 0 significant damage. They did not relocate the city. They turned 6,000 screws by hand and kept the shops open while they did it, landing at number 33, the river that ran backwards. On January 2nd, 1900, the Sanitary District of Chicago completed the 28-mile Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal and reversed the natural flow of the Chicago River. The river, which had always drained into Lake Michigan, was permanently redirected toward the Mississippi. The American Society of Civil Engineers named it one of the 7 wonders of American engineering in 1955. The construction technique, blasting through bedrock with dynamite and removing debris with steam shovels mounted on rail systems, was directly adopted by the engineers of the Panama Canal 14 years later. Chicago didn't just build a canal, it changed the direction a river had been flowing since the last ice age. Fact 32, the flood nobody saw coming. On the morning of April 13, 1992, the sky over Chicago was clear. No rain, no warning, and then the basements of City Hall, the Art Institute, the Federal Reserve Bank, and the Sears Tower began filling with river water. A construction crew had cracked the roof of a forgotten freight tunnel 40 feet below the loop in September 1991. City engineer James McTeague photographed the leak in February 1992 and warned his supervisors it would cause catastrophic flooding. the city rejected a repair bid of $10,000 as too expensive and scheduled a new inspection for April 14th. On April 13th, the wall gave way. 250 million gallons of Chicago River water flooded building basements to depths of up to 35 feet. Downtown shut down for 3 days. Remediation cost nearly $2 billion. The city knew. They had the photographs. They rejected a $10,000 fix and paid $2 billion for it. Coming in at number 31, the fair that invented tomorrow. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition drew 27 million visitors, roughly 40% of the entire United States population at the time. Here's what Hollywood never told you. That fair introduced the world to the Ferris wheel, 264 feet tall with 2,160 simultaneous riders, the zipper, Cracker Jack, juicy fruit gum, the automatic dishwasher invented by Josephine Cochrane, and the first large-scale public demonstration of alternating current electricity, all documented by the National Park Service inventory of 1893 World's Fair inventions. One fairground, 6 months, the zipper on your jacket, the Ferris wheel at every county fair in America, and the dishwasher in your kitchen, all from Chicago, all from 1893. The fair is remembered for a serial killer. Nobody names what it actually gave the world. At number 30, America's first serial killer. The part Hollywood got wrong. Here's what Hollywood never told you about H.H. Holmes. Historian Adam Selzer, author of H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, places the confirmed body count at approximately 9 victims, all people Holmes already knew, not random visitors pulled from the street. The building was never completed or opened as a hotel. The 200-victim murder hotel is, per the documentary record, a product of 1940s pulp fiction and yellow journalism. Holmes confessed to 27 murders at one point. Several of those people were later found alive. Hollywood gave America a 200-victim murder hotel. The Chicago court record gave us 9 confirmed deaths and a world-class insurance fraudster who also happened to kill people. The truth is stranger than the movie, and somehow more disturbing. Fact 29. The fire that built the modern world. The Great Chicago Fire burned from October 8th through October 10th, 1871, destroyed 3.3 square miles of the city, killed approximately 300 people, and left 100,000 homeless. According to the Chicago History Museum, the Board of Police and Fire Commissioners generated 1,100 pages of handwritten testimony and concluded only that the fire started in the O'Leary barn. The cause was never legally established. Catherine O'Leary's cow was never legally implicated. In 1997, the Chicago City Council posthumously cleared her 126 years after the rumor destroyed her life. And here's the number nobody quotes. The fire killed 300 people. The 1915 Eastland disaster killed 844. The 1903 Iroquois fire killed 602. The 1995 heat wave killed 739. The fire everyone knows about was not Chicago's deadliest disaster. Not even close. Landing at number 28, the city that invented the sky. In 1885, William LeBaron Jenney completed the home insurance building at Adams and LaSalle, the first building in the world to use an iron and steel skeleton frame as its primary structural support, per the Chicago Architecture Center and PBS Building Big. Its design weighed 1/3 as much as an equivalent masonry structure. By the time New York completed its first steel frame skyscraper in 1889, Chicago already had 5. The field building constructed on the demolished site in 1931 carries a plaque that reads, "The true father of the skyscraper, New York, has the skyline." Chicago invented the principle that made skylines possible. Coming in at number 27, the strike that created Labor Day. The Pullman strike began on May 11, 1894, when workers at the Pullman Palace Car Company walked off the job to protest wage cuts that had not been matched by rent reductions in the company town where they were required to live. 250,000 railroad workers across 27 states stopped work. President Grover Cleveland sent 14,000 federal troops to Chicago. The first time a sitting president used the federal military against a labor strike, approximately 34 people died. Deb served 6 months in prison and emerged a socialist. Congress passed the legislation creating Labor Day on June 28, 1894, just days before Cleveland sent in the troops. Congress gave workers a holiday. Then the president sent 14,000 troops to make sure workers knew what that holiday was actually worth. Fact 26, the jungle nobody finished reading. Upton Sinclair spent nearly 2 months undercover in Chicago's packing town in late 1904, living alongside immigrant meatpacking workers. The Newberry Library documents that by 1904, the majority of packing house workers were recent immigrants from Poland, Slovakia, and Lithuania. The Union stockyards processed 14 million animals per year, 26 per minute, around the clock. Sinclair intended the novel as an argument for labor rights. The nation read it and demanded food safety regulation. The Federal Meat Inspection Act and Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 passed directly as a result. Sinclair's famous lament, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, I hit it in the stomach." The people who paid for that regulation with their fingers and their lungs got a paragraph in a textbook. At number 25, the massacre before the city. On August 15, 1812, Captain Nathan Heald led the evacuation of 95 people from Fort Dearborn, located at what is now Michigan Avenue and Wacker Drive. 1.5 miles south along the Lake Michigan shore, approximately 500 Potawatomi warriors attacked. In under 1 hour, 52 of the 95 evacuees were killed. According to Ann Durkin Keating's Rising Up from Indian Country, published by Northwestern University Press, the episode was renamed The Battle of Fort Dearborn by the Chicago Park District in 2009, acknowledging that the Potawatomi were defending territory taken through the 1795 Treaty of Greenville. More than 36,000 American Indians live in Chicago today. The history is under every building in the loop. Coming in at number 24, the deadliest theater in American history. On December 30th, 1903, an arc light malfunctioned backstage at the Iroquois Theater on West Randolph Street. The theater had been open for exactly 5 weeks. Building Commissioner George Williams and Fire Inspector Ed Laughlin had certified it fireproof beyond all doubt. The fire lasted 15 minutes. 602 people were dead. 212 were children. Grand jury indictments were filed against 5 people. The defense argued Chicago's fire ordinances were technically invalid. The judge agreed, all charges dismissed, not one person ever convicted. The theater at that address still operates today. I will tell you what happened to that building, and to the alley behind it, before this video is over. Fact 23, the house that changed every dance floor on Earth. In March 1977, a 22-year-old disc jockey named Frankie Knuckles arrived in Chicago from New York and began a residency at the Warehouse at 206 South Jefferson Street. According to the City of Chicago Landmark Designation Report for the Warehouse, published in 2023, it was between 1977 and 1982 at that address that Knuckles blended Philly soul, underground disco, European synth pop, and drum machine percussion into something no one had heard before. Regular attendees started calling the music house music, after the club's nickname. By 1988, it had catalyzed the British rave explosion. Every genre of electronic dance music traces its lineage to 206 South Jefferson Street. The global EDM industry generates approximately $10 billion annually. It began in a building most Chicagoans drove past without knowing it existed. Frankie Knuckles died in Chicago on March 31st, 2014. He is still owed more credit than he was ever given. Landing at number 22, the Red Summer nobody remembers. On July 27, 1919, 17-year-old Eugene Williams drifted across an invisible racial boundary line in the water at the 29th Street beach. White youths threw stones. One struck him. He drowned. The white man, identified by eyewitnesses, was not arrested by police present at the scene. That refusal triggered 7 days of street fighting. When the Illinois National Guard finally ended the violence, 38 people were dead, more than 500 injured, and over 1,000 black families had lost their homes to arson, according to the Chicago History Museum's Red Summer documentation. Richard J. Daley, Chicago's mayor from 1955 to 1976, was a 17-year-old member of the Hamburg Athletic Club, identified by post-riot investigators as among the primary instigators of the violence. He never acknowledged it. The city sent its black residents to fight a world war for American democracy. When they came home, a white mob burned their neighborhood down. At number 21, the southernmost point of an inland ocean. Lake Michigan is the only Great Lake located entirely within the United States. According to the Great Lakes Commission, it holds just under 1,180 cubic miles of water and reaches 925 feet at its deepest point, deeper than any point in the Gulf of Mexico within 100 miles of shore. Its 1,600 miles of shoreline are the longest freshwater coastline in the country. After the 1900 river reversal, Chicago effectively controls the flow between the Great Lakes Basin and the Mississippi River Basin, generating legal battles with downstream states that continue today. Most people look at the Chicago lakefront and see a shoreline. What they are looking at is the edge of the largest freshwater ocean on the North American continent. Coming in at number 20, the deadliest ship in American history, 3 miles from shore. On July 24, 1915, more than 2,500 Western Electric employees boarded the SS Eastland near the Clark Street Bridge. Before the ship moved a single inch from the dock, it rolled onto its side and capsized in 20 feet of water, 19 feet from the wharf. No evacuation was ordered, no life jackets distributed, no lifeboats launched. 844 people drowned or were crushed, including 22 entire families wiped out entirely, and 75% of victims were under 25, according to the Eastland Disaster Historical Society and Britannica. No criminal convictions resulted. The Titanic is a movie, a museum, and a monument. The Eastland killed 844 people 19 feet from the dock in the Chicago River, and almost nobody outside Illinois knows its name. The Eastland capsized 19 feet from the dock and killed 844 people, and most people outside Illinois have never heard of it. If you want to know the history that actually happened, not the sanitized version they put in the brochure, subscribe to Depths of America. It is free. The Eastland Disaster Historical Society spent 40 years of advocacy just to get the ship taken seriously. All we are asking you to do is hit a button. Fact 19, the death that woke up America's lunchbox. Chicago's Union Stockyards opened in 1865 and closed July 30th, 1971. At their peak, they occupied 475 acres and processed 14 million animals per year. The conditions confirmed by federal investigators dispatched by President Theodore Roosevelt: fingers amputated on assembly lines, tuberculosis through crowded floors, workers falling into rendering vats, directly produced the Federal Meat Inspection Act and Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, the first time the federal government assumed regulatory authority over private food production, according to the Theodore Roosevelt Center. The stockyard site is now an industrial park. Landing at number 18, the deep tunnel that shouldn't exist. Chicago's Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, the Deep Tunnel, is a 175-kilometer underground network carved through Silurian dolomite bedrock, up to 350 feet below street level, per the Association of Environmental and Engineering Geologists' 2026 annual meeting documentation. Its tunnels reach 33 feet in diameter. Its budget exceeds $4 billion. The geological formation it operates within, Silurian dolomite, approximately 430 million years old, deposited at the bottom of a prehistoric inland sea, is the same rock that forms fossilized coral reefs visible in Chicago's western suburbs today. It has been under construction for 50 years. Tonight, it is still not finished. At number 17, the corridor that made muddy waters. Here is what nobody taught you about where rock and roll came from. Scholars at the University of Chicago Library document jazz arriving in Chicago not via Mississippi riverboat, as the myth insists, but directly via the Illinois Central Railroad into 12th Street Station. Chess Records, founded at 2120 South Michigan Avenue in Bronzeville in 1950, recorded Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Little Walter, and Sonny Boy Williamson. The music that the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin studied and made the basis of everything called rock and roll. The Rolling Stones named a song after the Chess Records address. They came to Chicago specifically to meet the musicians whose records they had learned from in England. The history of rock and roll has a South Side Chicago zip code. Nobody advertised that on the tourist map. Coming in at number 16, the deadliest city for wings. A 2019 study in Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Researchers found Chicago is the most dangerous city in the United States for migratory birds. Its position on the Mississippi Flyway, combined with its glass skyscrapers and light pollution, creates a lethal corridor for hundreds of millions of birds traveling between Canada and South America. On October 5, 2023, retired Field Museum Collections manager David Willard counted at least 960 dead birds from a single night at McCormick Place. 40 years of monitoring, never that many in one morning. His words, "You're looking at a rose-breasted grosbeak that, if it hadn't hit a Chicago window, would have made it to the Andes of Peru." The city that prides itself on its skyline kills more migratory birds than any other city in America. The building didn't even have to move. Fact 15. The night the heat killed 739 people alone. From July 12th to July 16th, 1995, Chicago's heat index peaked at 119 degrees, a city record documented by the CDC's August 1995 Morbidity and Mortality Weekly report. 739 people died. More than 70% were over 65. Most were elderly, poor residents who could not afford to run air conditioning or were afraid to open their windows at night because of crime. On July 15th alone, 215 people died in a single day. The Cook County Medical Examiner requisitioned refrigerated trucks as temporary morgues. Some of those who died were buried in mass graves without names. Nobody was fired. Nobody was prosecuted. Some were buried without names. At number 14, the Panama Canal came second. The construction technique that made the Panama Canal possible, blasting through bedrock with dynamite, removing debris with steam shovels on rail systems inside the excavation trench, was not invented for Panama. It was invented in Chicago. The Linda Hall Library of Science documents that Chicago's sanitary and ship canal used precisely this method, completed in 1900, 14 years before Panama opened. When Sanitary District President William Boldenweck broke the last dam at Lockport on January 2, 1900, having lost both parents to a cholera epidemic. He said simply, "Let her go." Chicago invented the techniques. Panama got the history books. And even all of Chicago's engineering genius does not prepare you for what happened inside a single building on West Randolph Street in 1903. We are almost there. Fact 13. The population that rewired American music. Between 1910 and 1970, approximately 1.6 million African Americans migrated to Chicago via the Illinois Central Railroad. African Americans went from 2% of the city's population in 1910 to 33% by 1970, per WWTTW, Chicago's DuSable to Obama series. In Bronzeville alone, that concentration produced the Electric Blues, recorded at Chess Records, the gospel of Thomas Dorsey, who wrote Precious Lord, Take My Hand, on Chicago's South Side, the Pulitzer Prize-winning poetry of Gwendolyn Brooks, and the Chicago Defender newspaper, the single most powerful instrument of the Great Migration itself. What those 1.6 million people built changed every genre of American music that followed. Nobody advertises that on the tourist map. Coming in at number 12, the deep dish was invented by accident. Deep dish was not invented by Ike Sewell. the man whose name is on the Pizzeria Uno marquee. A WTTW Chicago Stories documentary segment from October 17, 2025, attributes the actual recipe to Rick Ricardo Sr., an Italian artist who opened a restaurant at 437 North Rush Street in 1934, in a building that had previously been one of Chicago's earliest jazz venues. Ricardo partnered with Sewell to open Pizzeria Uno in 1943. Sewell provided the business. Ricardo provided the recipe. Chicago locals, for the record, primarily eat tavern-style thin crust. Deep dish is for visitors. The most famous food Chicago is known for was not invented by the man credited with inventing it. Number 11, the building that made every building. The Willis Tower, completed in 1973 as the Sears Tower, stood as the tallest building in the world for 25 consecutive years. It sways 6 inches on calm days and is engineered to allow 3 feet of sway in high winds. The Empire State Building moves approximately 1 inch in 100-mile-per-hour winds. In 2009, it changed its name when Willis Group Holdings leased several floors. Chicago let them. That is Chicago. Fact 10. The freight tunnel the city forgot. Beginning in 1899, the Chicago Tunnel Company dug a 60-mile network of freight tunnels 40 feet beneath the loop, originally under the guise of laying telephone cables, per the Chicago Public Library and WBEZ Curious City. At their peak, they served City Hall, the Merchandise Mart, the Board of Trade, the Chicago Tribune, and the Field Museum, and sold pumped subterranean air as natural air conditioning to connected theaters and hotels. Operations ceased in 1959. By 1992, most Chicagoans had forgotten they existed, until a piling cracked the tunnel wall under the Kinzie Street Bridge, and 250 million gallons of river water reminded everyone. The city had 60 miles of secret tunnels under its downtown for 60 years, forgot they were there, and paid $2 billion to remember. Landing at number 9, the race riot that the future mayor watched. I have read the Chicago History Museum's documentation of the 1919 Red Summer, and one detail has never left me. The Hamburg Athletic Club, identified by post-riot investigators as among the primary instigators of 7 days of violence that killed 38 people and left 1,000 black families homeless, counted a 17-year-old named Richard J. Daley among its members. Daley became mayor in 1955 and presided over the construction of the Robert Taylor Homes and Cabrini Green, concentrating poverty and racial segregation along the same South Side corridors where the 1919 riot had burned. Nothing was accidental. Daley never acknowledged participation. Nobody made him. At number 8, the deepest wound. Approximately 18,000 years ago, the land Chicago sits on was buried under 1 mile of glacial ice. When the glaciers retreated, they carved the Lake Michigan basin and left the surrounding landscape as flat, waterlogged clay barely above lake level. The bedrock beneath Chicago, Silurian dolomite, 430 million years old, deposited at the bottom of a prehistoric inland sea, is the same rock the deep tunnel operates within tonight, per USGS Glacial Mapping and AEG 2026 Chicago Geology documentation. Fossilized coral reefs from that ocean are still visible in Chicago's western suburbs. Chicago sits on the floor of a 430-million-year-old ocean. The city is a monument built on the bones of a world that no longer exists. Coming in at number 7, the Windy City politician, the one who actually was. A 2012 study from the University of Illinois at Chicago's Department of Political Science found that Chicago's Northern District of Illinois produced more federal public corruption convictions than any other federal judicial district in the country over the prior 30 years. Between 1976 and 2012, more than 1,500 public officials were convicted. More than one per week, every week, for 36 consecutive years. 4 of Illinois' last 8 governors served time in prison. New York called Chicago the Windy City because it was full of hot air. They just did not have the federal conviction data yet. Fact 6. The glacier left a time bomb. The The bedrock beneath Chicago connects to the New Madrid seismic zone, centered approximately 360 miles south in the Missouri-Tennessee-Arkansas region. The USGS and Illinois Emergency Management Agency have both issued guidance on New Madrid risk to Chicago, a repeat of the 1811 to 1812 earthquakes, estimated at magnitude 7.5 to 8.0, strong enough to temporarily reverse the Mississippi River and ring church bells in Boston, could cause catastrophic structural damage here, amplified by Chicago's soft glacial clay overburden. The same clay that made the city impossible to drain in 1850 makes it uniquely vulnerable to a fault 360 miles away. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. At number 5, the alley called Death. The Iroquois Theater did not burn down on December 30th, 1903. The building survived. It reopened as the Colonial Theater, was demolished in 1925, replaced by the Oriental Theater, closed in 1981, restored in 1998, and still operates tonight as the Nederlander Theater at 24 West Randolph Street. The alley between Lake and Randolph Streets, officially Couch Place, was dubbed Death's Alley by Chicago newspapers on the morning of December the 31st, 1903. Rescuers found bodies stacked against exit doors that opened inward against the crowd. Not one conviction, not one cent of restitution. The building is still there. We are going there now. Fact 4, the blue water that came back. The Chicago River today supports 70 documented species of fish, according to Metropolitan Water Reclamation District monitoring, up from essentially zero in the mid-20th century. River otters, great blue herons, and peregrine falcons now nest within the city limits. The Burnham Wildlife Corridor, created to reduce bird mortality near McCormick Place, supports breeding songbirds within 1 mile of the loop. They reversed a river to stop it from killing people. Then they polluted it for 70 years. Then they cleaned it up. Now otters live in it. The Chicago River has had 4 completely different identities in 200 years, and all 4 happened on the same stretch of water, landing at number 3, the city that built itself twice. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed 3.3 square miles and left 100,000 homeless. Within 17 years, Chicago had built the first steel-framed skyscraper, hosted a World's Fair drawing 27 million people, reversed its river, and become the second largest city in the United States. The same city built the Union Stockyards, the Pullman Company town, whose workers' revolt created Labor Day, the Bronzeville neighborhood, whose musicians invented the electric blues, and the freight tunnel network the city would spend $2 billion cleaning up in 1992. The city's motto, adopted in 1837, is Urbs in Hordo, City in a Garden. It was built on a swamp, burned to the ground, raised by hand, flooded from below, scorched by heat, and rebuilt every single time. There is not a garden. There is something tougher than a garden, and it has always been there. Coming in at number 2, what every building on West Randolph Street already knows. Every night of theater performed at that address since 1903 has been performed in a building that stands where 602 people died in 15 minutes and nobody was ever held responsible. The Nederlander Theater does not mention the Iroquois Fire in its promotional materials. CBS Chicago documented in November 2022 that paranormal investigators have recorded unexplained phenomena in the alley and theater space that have never been officially explained. The 5 people indicted kept their careers, their pensions, and their names. The families received nothing. I have read every documented account of the Iroquois Theater fire, and I cannot tell you why the city's fire ordinances were ruled technically invalid in a way that protected every defendant simultaneously. Nobody can. And finally, number 1, the Fireproof Theater. November 23rd, 1903. The Iroquois Theater opens at 24 West Randolph Street. It is billed as the most beautiful theater in Chicago. The advertisements use the word fireproof. Building Commissioner George Williams and Fire Inspector Ed Laughlin have cleared it fireproof beyond all doubt. There is no sprinkler system. Exit doors have no lights. Some are locked with European biscuit latches American audiences have never encountered. The fire warden has been told by the theater's syndicate that he will lose his job if he reports violations. He does not report them. December 30th, 1903, 3:15 in the afternoon. More than 2,000 people are inside for a holiday matinee of Mr. Bluebeard. 400 are standing beyond the legal capacity. An arc light shorts out and ignites a muslin curtain. The fire moves through more than 300 stage curtains. A fireball rolls into the balconies. Stagehands flee through the rear doors. Those doors, when opened, create a draft. The fireball accelerates into the house. At 3:20, the fire is out. A firefighter thrusts his head through a side exit and shouts, "Is anybody alive in here?" Silence. 602 people are dead. 212 are children. 250 more are injured. In Death's Alley, rescuers find bodies stacked against doors that opened the wrong way. Grand jury indictments, theater owners Will Davis and Thomas Noonan, stage manager James Cummings, building commissioner George Williams, fire inspector Ed Laughlin. Defense: Chicago's fire ordinances are technically invalid. The judge agrees. All charges dismissed. Not one person convicted. Not one family compensated. Not one official fired. The building reopened as the Colonial Theater, demolished in 1925, replaced by the Oriental, closed in 1981, restored in 1998, still open tonight as the Nederlander Theater, 24 West Randolph Street, Chicago, Illinois. The theater is still there. The ticket booth is still open. They are still selling seats. And the alley the newspapers call Death's Alley on the morning of December 31st, 1903, is still right where it has always been. Chicago is a city that rebuilds everything. What it has never rebuilt is accountability.